Okay, good evening. My name is David Ashman. I'm from SEB Housing, and this is the information session for the affordable condominiums at North Village Condominiums in Douglas. We'll be going through some of the biggest points about the application process in the affordable housing program in this session. I should add as well that SEB Housing is an offsite affordable housing consultant group. Okay, we're not the developer. We're not on site, but we do work for the developer, and we work at various properties around the state that have affordable units. And we do the marketing and the lotteries for the affordable units, and we interact a lot with the applicants for the affordable units. As one of the main services that we provide is determining whether or not people qualify for the program. If you haven't already, I'd encourage anyone to go on our website. You can find the application and the information packet there. And I'm just going to type something into the chat box right now, which will be our website. So it's www.sebhousing.com. So if you haven't been there, you can go on our website, click on the Affordable Housing Opportunities link, and then click I want to buy, and then you'll find North Village Condominiums. You can click on the icon and go to a little separate page that has some more information about this opportunity. And from our page, you can actually download the information packet and the application, which may be of use to you if you'd like to just print the application and fill it out. If that doesn't work for you and you don't already have one, you can always get in touch with us. You can call us, email us, and we can send you an application. And let me just give you the email address. It's info@sebhousing.com. It's really the best way to get in touch with us, whether it's to get an application or if you have general questions about the process, the development, or anything else related to the affordable units there and how to apply. Email is best. If you want to call, that's fine too. Phone number is 617-782-2300. Just putting that in the chat box too. For this session, I'll be going mostly through some of the biggest points from the information packet. If anyone watching has a question, please feel free to ask and I will respond. You can't ask your questions out loud if you're watching on the YouTube live stream, but you can type them into the chat box where I've been typing information so far. So I'll just reiterate that point right now. And then, yeah, I'll stop what I'm talking about and try and answer your question. And if I'm not sure, I'll try and get you the answer and follow up with you. So this is a development. It's duplex units, but it is set up as a condominium. In total, there are 31 affordable units, but many of them, 12 of them have already sold. So there was already a lottery a few years ago, and now we are conducting a second lottery and marketing campaign for the 19 units that remain, the 19 affordable units, I should say, that remain, because there are a number of market rate units at this development as well. The affordable units will be sold to households that qualify at affordable prices, which we can talk about a little bit more as we go through this presentation. And the affordable homes will be ready starting soon, and then as there's 19 of them, they're not all going to be ready right at the same time or even within a few months. They'll get built out over a number of months or even years. But the first one should be ready relatively soon. And the developer, if you're a household who is in the lottery and is moving forward, will be able to show you plans and which ones are the affordable units and which lots they are and kind of what the expected time frame is. This development is situated on Compass Point Drive. It's off of North Street. It's really kind of set back nicely in the woods, it looks like. It looks like it's really quiet. There's a lot of open space for those who live here or who will live here. But also, you know, somewhat close to some commercial spaces. It looks like there's a middle school nearby. some restaurants, shopping. So, set back and quiet, but close to Route 146 with easy access to points north and south. So a nice location, especially if you like sort of the quiet. It's on a 20-acre parcel that will be manicured and in nice shape. And there's 40 acres of open space around it. As I said, there will be 19 affordable units. They're going to come in two different styles. The styles are either the Villager 1 or the Villager 2, and the developer can tell you which style is allocated for which lot, if and when you're able to move forward in this process. The affordable sales price is going to be set at $248,400, and that's just kind of the price. So that doesn't fluctuate depending on any particular applicant's financial circumstances. And the price isn't set on any particular applicant's financial circumstances. It's set based on area median incomes and a number of other factors, including taxes and interest rates. And when you factor in all of the payments that a household would make, it shouldn't constitute more than 30% of their gross income. So the affordable sales price is set pursuant to a formula, which takes into account area median incomes, which are published by HUD every year in April. Usually those numbers go up. Sometimes they stay the same or go down, but typically they go up each year. The condo fees are $125 a month. These are all 3-bedroom units. Okay, so there's no, it's just a 3-bedroom unit, whether it's, the Villager 1 or the Villager 2 style. They'll have 1.5 or 2 bathrooms, and anywhere from 1,600 to 1,700 square feet, and ample parking on site, anywhere from 2 to 4 spaces for each unit, depending on which model of home you choose and which model of car, I guess, you have. Some cars are bigger than others, take up more space. So, but in general, some of the units have a 1-car garage, and some have a 2-car garage. For some of them, the master bedroom is on the first floor, and for others, it's on the second floor. But in all cases, it's 3 bedrooms. There is garage parking and also a driveway in front of the garage. And all of these units will have a deed rider, which kind of limits how much you can resell them for and places restrictions on, who can live in the unit, and specifies that it's got to be your principal residence. So this isn't like an opportunity to buy one of these units and rent it out or put it on Airbnb or anything like that. And the deed rider, requires that the house, if and when sold, needs to be sold to another affordable buyer at an affordable price, which usually goes up. And if you've had the opportunity to, or if not, take a look at our information packet, which is on our website. And on the last page, we have a whole description of the deed rider and how the affordable resale price is set. That's a general example that we give. It's not specific to these particular units, so I can't tell you exactly what the resale price would be, and that will change year to year. Typically an affordable buyer can expect to be able to resell the home for some increase, but it's not going to necessarily just follow the market the way a market rate home would. There are restrictions, with the idea being that you can't. The price is $248,400 today. It wouldn't be an affordable unit if you flipped it in a year for $500,000, obviously, and that wouldn't, be affordable to someone else. So anyway, I don't think most people become interested in these opportunities with an eye towards trying to buy a home and flip it. But just in case anyone was watching and thinking, oh, I can, buy this beautiful brand new home, and maybe in a year or two from now, I'll, sell it on the market for some vastly increased price, the deed rider is not going to permit that. So let's kind of talk more generally about the steps in this process. And the first step is really applying. And if you're eligible, we'll put you in the lottery for the affordable units. And when you apply, really probably the biggest thing to keep in mind is that the application is pretty thorough. Okay, if you haven't looked at it already, I think it's like 29 pages, and there's a lot of information that we require and a lot of documents that you have to submit. The deadline to submit your application is December 29th, so exactly a month from now. And you want to get your application in early if you're interested in this opportunity, because the amount and sort of type of documentation that we require, which again is really just set according to the program. It's not like SEB is just making this up, is extensive, and it's kind of akin to what you'd have to submit if you were getting a mortgage commitment. So we're looking at a lot of income and asset and tax documentation. And in truth, many households do not submit a 100% complete application on the first try. In fact, the vast majority do not. And because of that, if you wait until December 27th or 28th to submit your application, chances are it may be incomplete. There may be things missing. And if there is something missing, then you're going to be in a position where you're kind of scrambling to try and find those documents and get them together. And that's not a fun place to be, especially right around the holidays and coming up on the new year. So while I'm not encouraging anyone to submit a definitively incomplete application where they know there's all kinds of documents missing, if you think it's close, I would encourage you to submit it so that you get a sense of exactly where you are and what's still missing. Because there's no limit on the number of times you can submit an application. And in fact, many households have to submit it 3 or 4 or even sometimes 5 times to get it totally complete. And if it's incomplete, that's fine. We'll just give you a bulleted list of exactly what's outstanding. And then you can, if you get it in early, have a little bit of time to go and collect those missing documents. So get your application in early if you think you're interested. The thing that probably takes the longest is you have to get a mortgage pre-approval that you submit with your application, and not a pre-qualification, which is similar but not as, I guess, rigorous or deep of a dive that the bank would do. So we're not looking for a pre-qualification, we're looking for a mortgage pre-approval. And that is a requirement with your lottery application. So please don't, and that probably of all the documents takes the most time. So if after watching this presentation, you think you're interested, that's probably the first thing that I would get started on, is trying to get a mortgage pre-approval. And so just talking generally here about some of the eligibility requirements. Everyone in the household must qualify as a first-time home buyer. And we'll talk about what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean very first. There's a durational aspect of that we'll talk about in a second. The entire household's income and assets must qualify under the program limits, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are. As I just said, the household must be pre-approved for a mortgage. And then finally, households or their families cannot have a financial interest in the development or be a related party. So, if you have any money wrapped up in this or have invested in this development in some way or stand to gain financially from this development, that would be a disqualifying factor. As far as related party, if you're related to the developer, okay, if you're related to the development team, someone on the development team, that would disqualify you. It would also disqualify any of your direct family members. So that is a question on the application. And the reason for that is to avoid, the appearance of any households getting a preferential treatment based on the fact that they are, they work for the developer or they're related to the developer. So let's just kind of first talk about the income and asset limits, because that's probably sort of the biggest criteria and the one about which there's most to say. And I will just reiterate again that most of the material that I'm covering comes from the information packet, which is on our website, which again is www.sebhousing.com. I'm going to be listing what certain income limits are or asset limits are. I'll be throwing around some figures. I don't want anyone watching this thinking that they've got to, write things down or memorize it or anything like that. All of these income limits and numbers that I'll be quoting are right in the information packet, which is on our website. They're in the ad. They're in the application too. So they're in a number of different places. So don't feel like you have to memorize this or write it down, because I'm going to kind of go through it quickly because it is there in these various places. So to be eligible for this opportunity, again, this is kind of under the heading income and asset limits, which is the biggest criteria and about which there's the most to say. The income limits are based on the number of people in your household. Okay, so that's everyone who's going to be living in the unit as their principal or primary residence. For a household size of 1, the income limit is $55,350. For a household size of 2, it's $63,250. For a household size of 3, it's $71,150. For a household size of 4, it's $79,050. For a household size of 5, it's $85,400. And for a household size of 6, it's $91,700. Now, the income limit is applicable to all members of the household, okay, to all members of the household. So when you go through the application, you'll see that we're asking for income documentation for basically everyone who's going to who's in the household, who's going to be living in the unit, with the exception of minors. And the reason for that is because income from minors does not count, nor does income from full-time students who are dependents. So if part of your household is includes a full-time student who's a dependent who you claim on your taxes, we would count up to $480 of any income that they have, but anything above that does not get counted. Now, an important clarification on income from minors or income from full-time students who are dependents is that those limitations or exceptions, I guess I should say, the fact that we don't count income that minors earn or anything above $480 for full-time students who are dependents, applies to the income from jobs. Okay, so if you have a 16-year-old kid who's going to be part of the household, who's going to be living in the unit, and they have a job, they make $5,000 a year, we don't count that, okay? Or if you have a full-time student who's a dependent, who's going to be living in the unit, they make $5,000 a year, we only count $480 if it's $5,000 from a job that they have. Now, if it's money that they earn from a different source, let's say there's a trust set up in their name, or there's a benefactor who's giving them, $500 each month, or some other source of income that's not from a job. Now that's different. Okay, that's different. That does get counted towards the income limit. In either case, or whatever the case, the applying household doesn't get to decide which income does and doesn't count, and shouldn't provide documentation accordingly. In other words, they shouldn't say this income doesn't count, therefore I don't have to provide documents relative to it. If the application asks for a certain income source or documents related to it, then you have to provide it, okay? Income is generally counted with an eye towards what a household is likely to make over the next 12 months. And the best predictor of what a household is likely to make over the next 12 months is what they've been making, okay, in their last year's tax returns, and what they've been making as per their 5 most recent pay stubs and other sources of income. And we have to look at that and sort of project forward. Now, obviously, projecting forward is necessarily an imperfect science. Things can change, but that's the best, most current information that we have, and so that's what we have to go off of. in general, we have to assume that a household is going to continue to earn money that they've been earning, unless there's something that shows pretty definitively that that's not the case. Okay. So, sometimes it comes up where a household on their 5 most recent pay stubs has been working overtime. And a household may say, yeah, but that was just, I needed the extra money. I picked up extra shifts, but that's not my plan going forward. And I don't intend to do that next year or ever. But if there's not, that's just sort of a statement of a future intention. We don't have sort of evidence of that being a part of a pattern. And in that case, we probably have to assume that the household is going to continue to work those extra shifts and work and get overtime. And so we'd have to project out as if that's the case. Now, a different case might be a seasonal employee who, always works, let's just say they're seasonal in the winter, and that's when they work the most and make most of their money, but they really scale back in the summer and other months. And they've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years, and they have a documented history of that. Well, in that case, that's a little different, because if you just extrapolated from what they made in the winter months, it would really be a lot more than what they actually make, because in the summer months, they don't work as much, they don't earn much. But they have a documented pattern of that going back years, where they can say, look, I do all of my work in the winter, then in the summer, I scale it back. In that case, we could say, okay, you've got a pattern of doing that. We can account for that. We're not going to project as if you're going to, in every month of the year, earn what you made in your biggest month of the year, which let's say was January. Okay. Income, as you'll see in the application when you go to fill it out, is defined fairly broadly. There's a lot of different sources of income that people can have, and we include an income table in large part to help sort of tune you in to the different sources of income that you may have, so that you don't overlook some of them when you begin to collect the documents that show what your income is. So kind of the most obvious one, and the one that I think comes to mind most readily for most people when you say, what is your income, is, well, what do you make at your job from your employer? And you do need to provide pay stubs, and that may very well apply to you. But you could have different or additional sources of income about which we also need to know and which we need to count. In this day and age, a lot of people are self-employed, and if that's the case, you need to provide information relative to your self-employment. You'd even have to fill out a profit and loss statement, which we include in the application, so we can get a better sense of what your income from your self-employment is. You might receive Social Security income or Social Security disability income. You may have a pension from which you're drawing down. You might receive unemployment compensation or workman's compensation, or even severance pay from a job you've left. You may receive periodic payments from family or friends, and this one comes up sometimes. Perhaps you have a parent or a loved one who, let's say they give you $1,000 a month to help with groceries or for whatever purpose. That's great. That, if it's recurring, would count as income. You may have certain assets that generate interest income, and so that counts as income as well. And so that's not an exhaustive list necessarily of all the different sources of income, but those are some of the types that kind of come up with the most frequency. And so my recommendation is that households take their time when they go through that income table in the application, because it's really easy to overlook something, right? It's really easy if you just say, what's your income? And you think, well, what do I make at my job? That's my income. And that's certainly one source of income, but it's not the only source of income. And so you want to take your time with that so that you don't give yourself necessarily a false sense, get your hopes up and say, well, I make X amount from my job. That's under the income limit. Great. I seem to meet that criteria. Oops, you've totally forgotten that you have an asset that generates income. You've forgotten to, that the alimony or child support payments you receive counts as income. So, take your time going through that table. That there's much there for your benefit as it is ours, so that you don't overlook things. You also have to provide the 3 most recent federal tax returns. from the past 3 years. The main point of that is to see if a household has owned a home within the past 3 years. If you haven't filed taxes, you have to get a statement of no filing from the IRS, and there are instructions in the application about how to do that. So that's as much as I'm going to say about income. Income is obviously a big category. It's also a category that is very individual. And so every household is going to have, a different amount of income, different sources of income. And if you begin to fill out the application and you find out that you have questions related to your income, please get in touch with us. That's what we're here for. And very often, a household may not exactly know what their questions are about their income until they've kind of gotten in there and started to fill out the application. So that's totally fine. That's what we're here for. We're happy to help you if you do have questions. There are also asset limits. The asset limits for all members of the household combined, not for each one, but the aggregate asset limit is $75,000. And those are counted at the time of application. Please note, okay, and this question, I've been asked this question more than once. It definitely comes up with some frequency. Households will say, well, it's a $75,000 asset limit. I have $100,000, but I'm going to use 30 of that as a down payment, or I'm going to receive money from a family member as a down payment, and that doesn't count, right? And the answer is yes, it does. Okay, yes, it does. Money you would use as a down payment is included towards the $75,000 asset limit. Assets like income can be varied, and there is an asset table in the application with the same purpose to help cue you into some of the different assets that you may have so that you don't overlook them. Now, we don't look at personal assets, right? So if you have, cars or jewelry or whatever the thing might be, that we're not counting that, okay? But other assets, like probably the most common, are checking or savings accounts. Maybe you have multiple of them, and so you're going to need to provide the last 3 months or the last 3 most consecutive recent statements. In this day and age, a lot of people have Venmo or PayPal or other Cash App apps that they use, which are effectively, PayPal, Venmo, they're much like a checking account. The money goes in, it sits there, and then you can use it to pay someone else. And that counts towards the asset limit. And you would need to provide documents from those entities that show what you have in those accounts. You might have something like a certificate of deposit. That's where often, as I understand it, that's with a bank. You put some money in there, much as you would with a, like a savings account, but you can't touch it for 6 months or a year or some period of time. They tend to do a little better in terms of the interest rates that they provide. That counts as an asset. You may have, this one definitely raises eyebrows. 401ks or investment retirement accounts, those count. Okay, those count. And I know that oftentimes households say, well, what do you mean that counts? I'm only 40 years old, or I'm 50, or I'm 30. I'm not planning on accessing that for another 20, 30, 40 years, whatever the case may be. Why should that count? It's money there for my retirement. And I don't disagree with that sentiment, but that's what the program says that we have to count. We have to count the net cash value, because in the majority of cases, the mere fact that you don't intend to access that money now or soon, and the fact that if you did, you might pay a penalty, does not technically mean that you can't. In most cases, you can. You'll pay a penalty, but we do need, by program rules, to count the net cash value of the account. And in that case, so if you have a 401k or IRA, you would need to get a statement from the benefits administrator that says, John Smith has an account here, the value is X. If he were to withdraw it today, he would pay a penalty of Y, and Z would be the remaining amount, the net cash value that he would be entitled to. That's what we have to count towards the asset limit. Again, I know that may seem wrong, unfair, whatever adjective you want to use, but that's what the program says that we have to count. You may have mutual funds or stocks or bonds. Those may generate interest. You may get dividends. Those would count towards the income limit. You need to provide documentation relative to those. And then another one is the down payment assistance, which we talked about already. That does count, whether it's money that you wouldn't have and would tend to use, or if it's money from, a friend or family member, that does count. And then the other big one is real estate, which, if we talked about when we, at the beginning, listed what the different eligibility criteria are. I said you have to be a first-time home buyer. So what does that mean? That means that you cannot have owned a home in the past 3 years. Okay, you cannot have owned a home in the past 3 years. Now, the exceptions to that are if you're over the age of 55, then that's an exception. Or you're a displaced homemaker, someone who lived in a house that they owned with their partner, primarily worked without remuneration or compensation around the house, and is now divorced from the partner and no longer owns the home. Or a single parent is another exception to that rule. And to get the single parent exception, that would apply if you own the home with a partner or spouse, and have now since sold the home, divorced the spouse, and you have at least joint custody of a child. At least joint custody of a child. Now, if you meet one of the exceptions, okay, if you meet one of those 3 exceptions that I mentioned, you can own a home at the time of application. You can own a home at the time of application. But the home would need to be sold by the time we've run the lottery in order for you to move forward, because we have to know how much you're going to make on the home, because that counts as an asset. Okay, so the home does need to be sold before you can move forward. So if you own it now, you can still apply. We'll ask questions on the lottery application about the value of the home and what debt you have on the property. You can apply now, but the home would need to be sold by the time we run the lottery before you can move forward in the process. Similarly, for any households who are currently married but sort of trying to apply without their spouse because they're in the process of separating or divorcing, the divorce would need to be finalized by the lottery time, and before you can move forward, because there's a lot of things that get decided in the divorce process, including things like child support and alimony and division of assets, and we need to know how that all shakes out so we can assess your eligibility. If the divorce is still ongoing and those things have not been adjudicated, we don't really know necessarily what your income or your assets are, and so therefore, you can apply if you've already begun the divorce process, but it does need to be finalized by around the time we run the lottery. And in either of those cases, for any household owning a home or who's currently in the divorce process, if you're otherwise eligible, when you apply, you would get a conditional eligibility notice from us that'll basically say, dear so-and-so, you seem to meet all of the eligibility requirements for this program, with the exception that, you do need to sell your home by the time of the lottery, or you do need to finalize the divorce by the time of the lottery, so that we can, give a final assessment of your eligibility. Okay, so when you, and then the final thing, so I talked about the income and asset requirements. I talked about how households have to be first-time home buyers. Households also have to submit a pre-approval with their lottery application. And there's a page in the information packet. The title is Mortgage Pre-Approval Standards. And you can read about the requirements related to the mortgage on that page about, this is going to be a fixed interest 30-year mortgage. You can't have a variable, you can't have an interest rate or an ARM or something like that. You can't finance more than 97% of the home price. It's got to have a current fair market interest rate as determined by reference to the Mass Housing published rate. Can't have more than 2 points. But in any event, I think the main takeaway from the mortgage pre-approvals is, and this is page 10 of the information packet, if I was applying for this opportunity, I'd make a copy of this page, or even just take it out of the information packet, or get a second version, whatever. Get a copy, go to a lender and say, here's the type of mortgage that ultimately is permitted in this program. Can you meet this? Okay. And generally, I would advise going to a bank that has some background doing affordable housing lending, because they're going to be familiar with some of the deed restriction requirements and whether or not they can actually provide a loan that meets the program requirements. You can go to whomever you want, okay? And I'm not saying, hey, you have to go to someone that's got affordable housing lending experience, but I think it's probably in your best interest if you do, because then you certainly increase your chances of going to a lender who's going to be able to deliver when the time comes when you need a mortgage commitment. Versus if you go to your Uncle Joe, who's a great guy, he does a lot of lending, but he's never, provided a loan on an affordable unit before. And when you need that commitment and, they start digging through some of the fine print and they see the deed rider and they say, oh, wait a second, this is a problem. This is not actually going to work. And now you're in sort of a tough position because you got to meet this mortgage contingency date, and now your financing is starting to fall through. Okay. There's a website. It's listed on that mortgage pre-approval standards page 10 of the information packet, called www.mhp.net and then /1, and it goes on a little further. If you go on that website, you can search by geographic region and find lenders with affordable housing experience. I'd recommend using someone there. I think it's your safest bet. I think it's your most surefire way of making sure you go to someone who's going to be able to provide a product when you need that commitment. In addition to this page, you might bring them the example deed rider that is downloadable from our website. The deed rider is something that can be problematic for certain types of loans. And so you want to make sure that whichever lender you go to has reviewed it and is familiar with its contents, and says, yep, this is not going to be a problem for us. We can make a loan with this deed rider in place. Again, the deed rider can be downloaded from our website, www.sebhousing.com. So again, bring that page to a lender, bring the example deed rider, which you can get from our website. I recommend going to someone with affordable housing experience, as I think that increases your chances of, being able to get a commitment when the time comes. Okay, let's kind of transition now a little bit from the application process and the eligibility criteria to what happens if you submitted a complete application and you're eligible, and the lottery and what all of that looks like. So the deadline to submit an application is December 29th. The lottery will be on January 12th, and the lottery will take place virtually, just as we're doing here. When you submit your application, if it's incomplete, we'll let you know what's missing, give you a bulleted list, and you can work on getting the things that are missing. If you're ineligible for whatever reason, we'll let you know that you're ineligible and the reasons why. And if you're eligible, we'll send you a lottery application number and a brief letter with some other pertinent information. You want to take some time, look through that letter, make sure that the information we've put in there squares with what you think you put in your lottery application. The number you get the lottery application number you get will be in the form of A dot blank blank blank, and that merely signifies the order in which we received your complete application. It has no bearing on, where you're picked in the lottery or your chances of moving forward or anything like that. It's just an anonymous identifier to be used in the lottery. When we do the lottery, all households will be picked. Okay, all households will be picked. There's just going to be one waiting list that we create. Now, this kind of is a little bit different than what most people think of when they think of lotteries. Most people think of, there are winners, there are losers. I still often get the question, who got picked? Will I get picked? And the answer is everyone gets picked. If you're eligible for the lottery, you will get picked. The way it works is like this. I'll take all the lottery application numbers of everyone who's eligible for the lottery. So let's say there's 10 lottery households. So it'll be A.001, that would be the first one, let's say, through A.010. I'll put all of their lottery application numbers in a box, and I'll pull those numbers out one by one, and I'll show them up on the screen, and I will call them out as I go. That whole process is pretty quick, actually. Okay, the lottery drawing takes all of, it depends how many households are in the lottery, but it can take any, on average, I would say, maybe 10 minutes. Okay. Now, from that drawing, we then create a waiting list. And the waiting list is really just sort of an order of priority for moving forward in the next step of the process. Okay, so it's not a waiting list like there are no units available. You can be on the waiting list and we'll call you if and when. It's not like that. It's a waiting list like there are units available, and this waiting list is just sort of a ranking, an order of who's going to get to move forward first. Now, on that waiting list, the way it gets populated or ordered is not quite as simple as where did a household get picked in the lottery, because there are certain priorities or preferences that we have to implement when we create the waiting list. So really the biggest one is based on a household size or type. When you fill out the lottery application, one of the first questions is going to ask you, what household type are you at? Are you a household type 3, a household type 2, or a household type 1? And the number that you are corresponds to the number of bedrooms that the program says a household of your type needs. So a household type 3 is a household that the program would say needs 3 bedrooms. A type 2 household is a household that the program would say needs 2 bedrooms. And a type 1 household is a household that the program would say really only needs 1 bedroom. Now, there are a couple different compositions of households that can make up each type. But for example, a 6-person household, no matter who's in it, is a type 3 household. A 5 or a 4-person household, no matter who's in it, is a type 3 household. Usually a 1-person household is going to be a type 1 household. And there are other examples, and you can just kind of find them when you fill out the application. But the general idea here is that larger households, or type 3 households, which tend to be larger households, are households who should be given priority because they are appropriately sized for these units, which have 3 bedrooms. Whereas type 2 and type 1 households who don't really need 3 bedrooms, they can also apply and they can also buy one of these units. They just shouldn't get equal priority to a larger type 3 household who really needs all 3 bedrooms. So what that means when we run the lottery and create the waiting list is that the top tier of households is all going to be type 3 households, followed by type 2 households, followed by type 1 households. So if the very first household picked in the lottery is a type 1 household, and there are a bunch of other lottery households who are type 3 and type 2 households, that first household, that type 1 household, is not going to be number 1 on the waiting list. Okay, they're not going to be number 1 on the waiting list. They're going to be behind all the type 3 and all the type 2 households. Similarly, if a type 2 household is picked very first in the lottery, well, if there are other households in the lottery who were type 3 households, then that type 2 household is not going to be number one on the waiting list. They're going to be behind the type 3 households, okay? So household composition and type is very, very important to where a household is on the waiting list, which in turn dictates the order in which this households will have the opportunity to purchase a unit. Now, if you're listening to this and saying, well, I'm a type 1 or a type 2 household, I think, does that mean I shouldn't apply or this is a waste of time? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It does not mean that at all. You absolutely should still apply if you're interested. And frankly, if you get into the lottery, I think there's a terrific chance that you'll have an opportunity to move forward and buy one of these units. So apply, okay? It just means you won't be number one on the waiting list. But there are 19 units, and I would venture a guess that we are not going to have 19 households for the lottery. So if you're interested, getting into the lottery, I think gives you a terrific chance of moving forward. On the night of the lottery, I will send around the waiting list, which will be ordered by rank where you are relative to other households in the lottery. Okay, so you'll get that the night of the lottery, provided you have email. If you don't have email, you'll get it a few days later in the mail. But if you have email, you'll get it that night, and you'll see, it'll be your lottery application number, and you'll see exactly where you are kind of relative to other lottery households. So when you get the waiting list, you'll kind of be able to plan, hey, I'm number one. That means I'm going to get a chance to move forward right away. Or, I'm number 7, so it might be a little while. I got to see what happens with, the households ahead of me, or whatever your number may be and where you are. That'll kind of let you know. Now, the question may come up, well, does the number 1 household, do they get assigned a specific unit? Or does the number 5 household get assigned a specific unit? Or does the number 10 household get assigned a specific unit? And the answer is no, okay? And that's where having a higher waiting list position is advantageous, because these units are not all coming online at the same time. They're going to be built out over months or years even. And so, if you're the number 1 household, you're going to be able to meet with the development team and say, show me the 19 units that are going to be built. I'd like to see which lots they are and which unit style. And then you'll be able to pick the one that works best for you, which may be the first one to be built, but maybe it's the second one, or maybe it's the third or the 5th one, right? And so there's a benefit to being higher on the waiting list. Once you've reserved that unit, then the next household on the list can engage in that process and reserve their unit of choice. And then once they've reserved a unit, then the 3rd household can engage in that process, and so on and so forth. Now, at that time, once we've run the lottery, that's really where the developer and the sales team become more engaged in the process. Because again, SEB Housing is off-site. We're an affordable housing consulting group. We're not the developer, and we're not on site, and therefore, we're not doing tours. We're not taking reservations or deposits or anything like that. So you would begin to work with them, and they can show you, which units are available. And the sort of sequencing of events after the lottery will go, we'll put the top household, after we run the lottery, we'll put the top household in communication with the developer and sales team. They'll have, probably a week or 10 days or something to reserve the unit of their choice. When they reserve the unit, they'll put down a deposit of $500. When they reserve the unit, they'll set a date for signing the purchase and sale agreement and coordinate those details. And the developer sales team can let you know when that needs to be done. When you sign the purchase and sale agreement, you'll put down another 1.5% of the sales price minus the $500 you've already put down. At that time, or even before, if you want to hire an attorney to help represent you, that's totally fine, and we encourage that. Buying a home is a huge purchase, and having an attorney on board to help represent your interests and make sure you understand what your rights and obligations are is never a bad idea, so you can do that. when you sign, the purchase and sale agreement, you'll probably set a date or a rough date for closing and a date for getting a mortgage commitment. SEB will kind of stay involved, but only insofar as usually households have to update their file a second time before they close on the unit. So we'll kind of be peripherally involved, and the reason for that is that you have to maintain program eligibility all the way up through closing. And so you're going to want to update your file, right? So if you get into the lottery, great. You've submitted all the documentation, you show you're eligible, terrific. Everyone gets drawn in the lottery, you get a waiting list position, you're moving forward, you meet with the developer, you reserve your unit of choice, sign a P&S, you get your mortgage commitment, and at that point, usually SEB is going to circle back around and say, great, please give us some updated, bank statements and pay stubs so we can see that you're still eligible, that you haven't, graduated out of eligibility in the months between when we ran the lottery and now, which can be a while, right? Depending on which unit you choose. I mean, it could be months between the lottery and when you get your mortgage commitment, especially if you're reserving one of the units to be ready later on in time. So you have to maintain eligibility all the way up through closing. And so you'll want to update your file so that when you do that second review with us, you'll have those documents ready. And that just pertains to the ones that, kind of change, right? So we'll already have your last year's taxes probably. But things like your bank statements, which, usually you can get every month, or pay stubs, which are usually every 2 weeks or every month or even every week, those are going to need to be updated. Once you close on the unit, there's some paperwork that needs to be signed and executed and recorded when you close, and we'll help facilitate that with the developer. So you don't need to worry too much about that. But then once you've closed on the unit, you're kind of done, right? You're mostly done. You don't have to undergo future eligibility reviews or fill out other applications or anything like that. The unit's yours and you can enjoy it. At some point, should you decide to resell it, and I touched on this towards the beginning of the presentation, you would notify the state, which is DHCD, and they can work with you through the resale process. And again, there's a limit on how much you can resell a unit for, and they'd be able to let you know at that time. Usually you can expect, a moderate increase each year. I can't tell you what that is. It depends on the area median income and what that does each year. So I'd be guessing if I told you right now. We give an example at the back of the information packet. So if you kind of like to get a better sense of how that works, take a look at the end, those last 2 pages, which describe the resale process and how that figure gets set. And that's kind of it. If there are any questions, please feel free to let me know what those are. Again, I think probably the most important takeaway from this whole presentation is, if you think you're interested, just submit an application early. And that way, if there's anything missing, and usually there is something missing, you'll have time to get it. And the other thing I didn't say on that is, even if you're really diligent and really careful and you submit every single document that's included in the application, and great, so you've been super careful. Something that sometimes happens with, some regularity is we're looking through your bank statements and we're seeing all these deposits, and some of them are kind of big, but they're not from your job, right? And so now we have to get documentation. Where does that money come from, right? Did you forget to tell us about a job? Or are you not telling us about another source of income that you have? And so even if you've submitted everything that's technically specified in the application, sometimes the things that you submit elicit or raise additional questions. And so that's just another reason you want to get everything in early. So Esther, question, I know you had said all 19 units won't be ready at once. How long do you project it might take based on previous lotteries? Great question, Esther. And I don't know. The developer would need to let you know exactly what the build-out scheduling is. I can tell you as a lottery agent, having worked with a number of different developers in different communities, these things can be hard to predict. A lot of times we're told one thing and then the build-out takes longer than expected. And usually it takes longer than sort of what's anticipated. But I would say 19 units is going to take at minimum a year and maybe closer to 2 or even more. Okay. And if you submit an application and you're eligible, if and when you're able to move forward after the lottery, the developer could give you a more precise, I guess, timeline of what their expectation is for the build out. But I would not, whatever they say, I would just build in the fact that it's new construction and things can change, right? There could be, there's a lot of moving parts. There could be more supply chain shortages, which I know have made things really difficult. So there's a lot of factors that can influence those timelines. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. I hope you found it useful and informative. Again, the application and information packet are on our website. Take a look if you haven't already, and we hope to see your application soon. And I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you again.